All right, so we're going to go over the entire pipeline here from After Effects to Cinema 4D to Unreal. So I'm working with the footage that we've been working with. We've done this before. So first thing we need to do after we import our image sequences, we need to track it. So I'm going to click on the tracker, track camera, and let it process. All right, you can see that it's processing here. It's almost finished. Depending on how long your clip is, this could take a little bit of time. So it's solving the camera. We've done all this. This is nothing new. It's just taking another moment. And it finished. So here we have our tracking marks like we've seen before. I'm going to select some of them. Remember, you want these points to be flush with the ground that you're trying to create. Remember, the position of this target right here is the 000 spot in 3D space. So now that I have some points selected that I'm happy with, I'm going to right click, set ground plane and origin, very important. And then right click again, create solid and camera. Okay, now I can click off, and if I scrub, I should see that my surface or my solid stays flush with the ground, like we've seen before. Footage just takes a little time to process here. There we go. Looks great, really happy with that. All right, so that's really all we need to do in After Effects. Now we need to save this out for Cinema. So we're going to go to File, Export, Maxon Cinema 4D Exporter. Export, Maxon Cinema 4D Exporter. It's going to give you a little warning. You got to save the project. Okay, oops, forgot to do that. Just save the After Effects project. Now it will let you do an export Maxon Cinema 4D Exporter. It might give you a little warning about 2D layers. That's because the video layer is not a 3D layer, it's a video layer. So click OK. We're okay with that. Save this out as something. I'll just call this Enceladus. That's my daughter's name. I'll call it 1. Okay. So that's saved out. And now I can jump over to Cinema. So I'm using Cinema 4D Lite here. So if you just have Creative Cloud installed with After Effects, you can browse to wherever you saved that file at. And if you double click it, it should open it right up. The workaround is if you can't get Cinema 4D Lite to come up, in After Effects, go to File, New, Maxon Cinema 4D file, and that will ask you to save a new one, and that should automatically open up Lite. If it asks you to log in, use your SVA login and go through the standard username and password SVA login thing, and that should let you in. Okay, so I'm in Cinema now. I'm going to go to File and Open and find that project that I just created where I saved it at. Double click on it. Might say there's some plugins missing, not a big deal. All right, load it up here. So if I scrub this, I should see the camera movement, which is what I want, right? This is what we're trying to export. I remember we went through and we added the background and we aligned all that stuff. That's less important to do to get into Unreal. We can do that, and you can look at that documentation to do that, but none of that is getting exported to Unreal anyways. We're just exporting the camera, so that's less important to do in the grand scheme of things. The one thing that we do have to do though, if I go and change my camera up here to default camera, and I hold down the Alt Option key, I can kind of move myself around. You see the grid down here. You see the solid. The solid should be on the grid, but it's not, right? We want to get that solid on the grid. So the fastest way to do that is to go up here into the Objects panel and click on the top level. It's going to be called whatever your After Effects project was called. And click on that. And then go down here and click on Coordinates. And we want to change the Y-axis. Right now it's 540. We want to change that to 0. You see as I change this number, it lowers down, right? If it's 0, that means it's going to be sitting on the grid. And if I look at it now, kind of navigate myself around, it's on the grid, which is what I want. Okay, and if I go back up and change my default camera from, default camera is just like a free camera, you know, allowing you to look around. 3D tracker camera is the camera that we tracked from After Effects. So I'm going to click back on 3D tracker camera, and now scrub, same sort of movement, but now the solid is sitting on the grid, which is very important and what we need to have happen. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, save project, just so that's here. We could set up the background again here. That's less important. I can show you how to do that really quick. So if I go to Create Environment Background, it becomes white, right? And if I go up to Window, Material Manager, it's going to pop up a little window over here. I need to create a new material. So create new default material. Double click on this new material that I made. And I need to be clicked on color and click on these little dots next to texture and browse to wherever the image sequence is of the same image sequence that I used in After Effects, right? So click on the first one, click open, and it should pop up. Then you're going to need to click on the little arrow next to texture to get the drop down. You're going to need to click on animation. We're going to scroll down. We're going to click calculate below movie, all this movie stuff here. This is what calculates how many frames there are. You should see the thumbnail update. We're also going to have to go into viewport and check this box that says animate preview. And also let's change the texture preview size to like 512 by 512, so it's a little bit higher quality. That's just the resolution of the video texture. After you do all that, you should be able to close this window down and then just drag the material onto the background. And after you do that, you should see basically what we had in After Effects, right? So that's not really an essential step for importing it into Unreal, but it is a nice step to do just to make sure that everything is in fact aligned. You know, if you have the background off, is it aligned? I don't know. Is it floating over the background? It's impossible to tell when it's just on the grid. That's why it's good to pop up the background just to check that everything is still good. Remember, this is a very tedious process. There's a lot of steps, so there's a lot of points where we can fail. It's good to double check everything. And it looks good. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and save that again. Save project, and click File, and we can go to, this is important, Save Project for Cineware. This is when it's going to allow us to save it out for Unreal. I'm just going to call this UE4 underscore Enceladus. Save. Okay. So it's at this point that I can jump over to Unreal. So I have a default project open here. And there's a couple things that we need to set up first. We need to click on Settings, and we need to go to Plugins. We need to go to Plugins, and we need to turn some of these things on. We need to type in Datasmith, and we want to turn on the Datasmith C4D importer. This is what allows us to import Cinema 4D files directly into Unreal, which makes things really easy for us in our pipeline. So check this. I already have it enabled in the interest of time. It's going to prompt you down here. Do you want to restart Unreal? Don't restart it yet because there's a couple other things we need to turn on. Next thing we need to turn on is Composure. Composure, turn this one on. Same thing, it's going to prompt you. Do you want to restart? Don't restart yet. We're going to do that again. We got to do something else. You only really need to do this once per project. If you create a new project, you're going to have to turn these things back on. But once you do it for your project, you're good to go. Okay, now we can close this window down. I need to go to Settings again, but this time Project Settings. So click on Project Settings, and I'm going to go to the Details panel here and turn on Alpha. I want to turn on, go down here, Enable Alpha Channel Support in Post-Processing. I want to change this to Linear Color Space only. And it's going to ask you to restart. I do have to restart now, so I'm going to click Restart and process this. So let Unreal load back up. So you need to turn on those two plugins, the Datasmith, the Composure, and then you need to go into Project Settings and change that to Linear Color Space. Okay, this loaded back up pretty quickly. All right, let's get started. So first thing we need to do is let's import our tracked camera. So we're going to click on Datasmith, and it's going to ask, where is your C4D file? So I'm going to browse to it. Where's it at? Here it is, UE4 Enceladus. Open. It's going to ask me where I want to save it. I'm just going to click Content and have it create its own folder. This is going to ask us what we want to import. We're only really importing the animations in the camera, and I'm also going to import this tracked solid that we originally created in After Effects, right? That's going to be useful for me to make sure that things are lined up. This, in my case, the blue solid here. Carrying the blue solid from After Effects over to C4D. Now we're going to bring it into Unreal. Okay, so I'm going to check those things and then click Import. This could take a little bit of time to import. Nothing crazy, but maybe a couple minutes. Be patient. Don't rush it. If it's taking longer than like 10 minutes, it's probably not going to work unless your camera track is really long. In this case, the camera track is only 8 seconds, so you'll see how fast it imports. This is pretty quick. So if that's taking a long time, you give it a little bit of time, but nothing crazy. Okay, so that imported, and I can see it over here in my world outliner. All the stuff that was in C4D is now in here. And if I go back to C4D, minus the background, the camera and the solid has been brought into Unreal. All right. All right, next step. Next step is that we are going to go into the folder in our content browser for that Datasmith imported. Should be the name of your Cinema 4D file. And I'm going to click on Animations, and here is this level sequence file. This has my camera animation in it. I'm going to double click it, and it's going to pop up my sequencer. If I click on the camera icon, I should be able to scrub and see my tracked camera moving around. Looks pretty similar to what we had in Cinema 4D and in After Effects originally. You can see it's really far away from my tables and chairs default setup. If you're not using the tables and chairs, that's fine. You could build your world around what you've imported here with your camera. Maybe you import the camera first and then you build your world around it. In this case, I have an existing world, albeit a simple one, but I want to adjust my tracked camera for my table and chair setup. So in order to do that, I need to scale it and also move it around. So in order to scale it, we are scaling the parent of the Datasmith file. Not the actual camera, not the solid. We're scaling whatever your Cinema 4D file was going to be called. That's what you're scaling. And I'm going to go down here and playing around with the location and the rotation and the scale of this. If I type in 0.1, see I get a lot closer, right? And you know, that's still a little too big, so I'm going to go even smaller. The numbers that you put in here is entirely dependent on what your tracked camera is, so don't use my numbers. I also want to rotate this, so I'm going to rotate on the z-axis, minus 90 degrees, minus 90 degrees over here. And it's a little off center, so I'm going to move this a little bit closer and then a little bit here. Cool. So another thing that you might notice, again, this is, I'm using the default sample project here with the table and chairs. So if you're not using that, then maybe this is less of an issue. But the point is that my tracked solid is right here. It's sitting on the grid, which it should. The tables and chairs in this case, they are not on the grid, so they're going to look like they're floating in the air. So I'm going to move them down to match the grid. Just basically making the Z 0 on all these things except for the statue, because the statue is obviously sitting on the table. The height of this floor was 32, that's why all these things have 32 as their height right now. Again, if you're not using the tables and chairs and you're starting from scratch, then this is not really necessary. All right, so now you can see my solid peeking through the floor here. It's kind of garbled a little bit, but that happens when two meshes occupy the exact same spot. So that's fine. So now if I click back on my camera and I scrub, you should see my camera movements and it's sitting on the grid. That's good to go. So now I have a tracked camera in Unreal. I'm going to go ahead and save all. And now we can move on to the next step. So next step is I need to import my video into Unreal. So I'm going to go to Add Import. This is something that we've done in the past a lot of times. Add Import, Media, Image Media Source. Image Media Source. I like to call this IMS. Enceladus. I don't know what we'll call this. UE4, I suppose. The name's not important. What's important is we double click it and we assign it the correct location of the file. So I'm clicking on the little dots next to sequence path. Then I'm going to browse to the original image sequence that I had imported into After Effects and then Cinema as well. So click open, set the frame rate. I know the frame rate of this is 30. Very important that you keep frame rate consistency. If I look at my After Effects file for my project here, it says it's 30 frames a second. Okay, save that, close that down in Unreal. Now I need to go to Add Import again, Media, Media Player, and click this little box, okay. I call this MP for Media Player, Enceladus, UE4, cool. Now if I open up the one with the TV, the Media Player here, and I have a couple of these in here because this is an old project. If I double click on the one that I'm using, I should see it start to play. It might take a second to play. So I recognize an unforeseen problem here. When I double click on this, it obviously doesn't play. It gives me an error down the bottom. And I realized that where I saved it at, I put my Cinema 4D file in the same folder as the image sequence, which turns out Unreal doesn't like. So I'm going to move my Cinema 4D files out of out of that folder so that error stops happening. If you didn't save them into the same folder to begin with, this wouldn't be a problem. But if you're getting an error, that's probably why. Okay, I moved them out. Let's give it a shot now. Okay, cool. Now it's loading. That's the thing with image sequence files. The software is looking for a name that you tell it and then consecutive numbers after that. Even though they were named very different, Unreal still didn't like it, so whatever. All right, so the point is it's playing. That's good. We're going to save that and close this down. All right, so we have a media file playing now. We've done that before. That's good. We're to the point now where we have our video footage imported into Unreal. Now I need to do the setup for our compositing with Composure. So I have these two windows over here, Composure Compositing and Layers. If you don't have those, you can open them in Window, Composure Compositing, and Layers. If you're using UE5, it's actually in a little bit different place in here. I think it's in Cinematics, or maybe even Virtual Production. But open both of those up, and I like to place them on the right side window here and on top of each other. So Composure is our compositing framework in Unreal that we're using to have place a foreground on top of a media plate and then a background perhaps behind that. So I'm going to right click, create new comp in this area. It's going to ask me, what do you want to do? I want to create an empty comp shot. I usually just call this comp. These names here are fairly important. It doesn't matter what you pick so long as you're consistent about it. And notice I can click on this here and it pops up a little preview window. This is showing me my composite right now. It's empty because we haven't set it up, but we're going to get there. So now I'm going to right click on this and go to Add Layer Element, and I'm going to add a media plate. Now there's a little drop down, click on media plate. I'm actually going to rename this to just be media. And see if I click on media, it pops up down here as well. It's black because I haven't told it any media yet. Let's set up the media. So clicking on media in the Composure Compositing window, I'm going to go over here to the details, and I'm going to tell it to use a media source. You click on Inputs, Media Source. Media source is the red one, it's empty. And tell it which media texture to use. You probably only have one. I have a couple here because this is an older project. This is what we just set up. So assign that. and you click on it, it's still black. That's okay. The reason that it's still black is because nothing's playing it. We need to go into our sequencer now. Remember where our tracked camera is. And we're going to put the media file in here so that it plays when we're scrubbing our camera keyframes. So I'm going to go over here to track, media track. We add a new media track. I'm going to put my timeline indicator at 0 frames, click the plus here, and go to IMS and sell this UE4. You probably only have one of these again. I have a couple because, again, it's an older project. All right, this adds. You have to drag this to the length of your timeline. The default is 30 frames. And still, there's no video. If I click on it, there's no video here. I have to right-click this, go to Properties, and assign the media texture here as well. If I click back on Media, you see this keeps disappearing every time. You can click on the little pin button right here, and that will pin it so it doesn't disappear when you click off of it, which is nice. And you see now the video is there, which is what we want, right? It's just the video. There's no world yet or anything like that. It's just the video. All right, next step is to start to add the CG assets on top of the video, okay? So I'm going to click on the top level comp again, the parent here, right click, add layer element, CG layer this time. And I'm going to call this FG for foreground. This name is important. Whatever you call it here, remember to keep that name a little bit later. I'm also going to delete my atmospheric fog and sky sphere. If you're not using the default level, then you may not have those, but those are going to screw things up for me. What I want to see basically is just black here. And actually, I shouldn't even be seeing this stuff right now, but that's because we haven't set it up yet. The next step is we need to tell the foreground layer exactly which assets to use in the foreground. So I'm going to tell it the table and the chairs and the statue. To do that, I need to create a new layer down here. So there's a couple different ways to do this. You could right click, create empty layer. And I'm also going to call this FG. And then we can select in the world the things that we want to put into this layer and just drag them in. See, now if I click on this, it says down here that I have 5 things in it. You can click the See Contents button if you wanted to see what's in it. And you can remove things, you can mute things, you can go back. So now I've put those things in a layer, but I haven't assigned that layer to the foreground compositing element yet. So I need to click on the CG element up here and go down to the details. And I need to go to Input Capture Actors. Right now it says 0 array elements. Click the plus, click the drop down here on the first array element, and we want to include. You can also exclude things. We want to include though. And we want to choose our actor set. Our actor set in this case is the layer we just created, FG for foreground. As soon as I do that, I should see just those assets in there, which is what I want. You know, I also accidentally put my floor in there. I don't want the floor in there. So I'm going to go into, click the foreground one, and I'm also going to click the push pin on that so it stays on the screen. The screen gets a little cluttered here with all this stuff. But I'm going to go in the foreground and click See Contents, and I'm going to remove the floor. And when I remove the floor, it should go black, which is what we want. What we want, black is basically going to be transparency. That's going to go on top of our video. So imagine the table of chairs laid on top of this media in the garden here. Right now, if I click comp, that's not going to happen. It's still empty. We haven't set it up yet. If you start to have a lot of these windows open, the other one might be hidden behind this menu. You need to close these ones before there's room. Okay, so now we need to set up the comp. So in order to do that, I'm going to click comp up top, and we need to set up some things. In input, target camera actor, I'm going to select the tracked camera. You should only have one. And I'm going to go to transform passes. It says 0 array elements. I'm going to click plus. It's going to give me transform pass 0. I'm going to set that up. Open that up. I'm going to set up the material, the green one here. Right now it says none. We need to create a new one. So I'm going to scroll up to the top here, click material. It's going to ask me where I want to save this. Save it somewhere. I'm going to call this M compositing underscore Enceladus, I guess. I'm just being particular about the names because I have some older stuff in here. I want to make sure I'm using the right one. So save. Okay, so now there's material in here. It looks a little different, but it's still not putting everything together. So I need to double click this material to open it up in the material editor. I usually like to take this tab and snap it up here so I have some room for myself. So let's set up the material. Clicking on the big node over here, we need to set some stuff up over here. We need to set material domain to post-process. And when we do that, a lot of this changes over here. And I need to set up the node system now. So I'm going to right-click and type in 2D texture. And I want texture sample parameter 2D. And I'm going to call one of these FG for foreground. And I'm going to copy and paste this, Command-C, Command-V, or Control-C, Control-V. And I'm going to name the other one media. Where did these names come from? These names are what I called things here, right? So now I have my two content sources, but now I need something that combines them together. And what I need to use is an over node. So if I right-click again and I type over, there's a composure-specific compositing node. I'm going to plug RGBA into emissive color. And I want foreground RGBA to be A over B. So foreground over top of media, RGBA from media into B. I can go ahead and save this. Maybe I'll save all again. And now, when I click on comp, you should see that it's laying over top. What I should be seeing right now is the video and the chairs, but for some reason that's not happening. I think I'm going to restart Unreal completely and see if that helps. The reason that this would happen is because the project settings, you didn't do the alpha linear color space only. I'm going to restart Unreal completely and see if that helps. So I'll be right back. All right, so it's just occurred to me that for whatever reason on these Macs, the setting in the project settings, typing alpha and going to enable alpha channel support, what we usually want to do is do linear color space only, but for some reason it's not knocking out the black and having it be alpha channel. So if it's not working for you, then just do allow through tone mapper. That's less ideal, but at least it will work. Ultimately, we were doing our compositing back in After Effects, so the colors of our video are less important. That's a little unfortunate, but it's okay. So I'm going to close that down. And now you can see if I click on Cobb, I have it pinned already, that the table of chairs are top of the video. And if I scrub my sequencer, they stick to the ground. Let me open this up bigger. Dun, 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 dun. Success. Now they're not positioned, they're not lit, they don't have shadows or any of that stuff, but it's working. And now if I want to move things around, the best way to do this is to pin the little window or have this window and drag it to the side a little bit. And then in your main viewport, you select the objects and just move them around. Remember, you want to move them on the grid. You don't want to move them up or down, because then they will be floating. So if I move them here, so they're not behind her, and I look at this, cool. Now you might see a little bit of choppiness, and your CG graphics might slip a little bit depending on how powerful your computer is. That should be taken care of when you actually render it out. So if you're seeing a little bit of lagginess, you can advance one frame at a time, just with the arrow buttons when you're in sequencer. And there you should see that it's sticking to the ground. Okay. Cool. So now I could go in and I could change things like my lighting and try to make this look a little bit better. I'm going to try to scale down my windows here so I can see. Close the place actors window. This is really a lot better if you have multiple monitors. So the table and chairs is a little bit hot. I'm going to go to my light and take down the power of that. You know, this is really just world building stuff that we're doing now. This is a very flat lit day in this shot, so we should make these objects very flatly lit. And obviously these settings are going to depend on what your video footage is. I did import some fun objects, some cemetery objects here. Then I can just drag these in to my scene. Oops. Oh no. So Unreal crashed. I was saying before Unreal crashed that I had these Halloween-y tombstone graveyard assets that I imported. And remember, we can get these things from the marketplace. And if you're having trouble adding the asset to your project in the marketplace, remember that you need to click self-service down here and install on this Unreal Engine thing. And that will allow you to add the marketplace assets to your project. So, I have these tombstone assets and stuff. I'm going to import them into my project. Remember, we want them to be placed on the grid. And you see it's not showing up here. And the reason for that is because it's not on a layer. I haven't told Composure to use it. So if I grab this gravestone and I drag it onto FG, Boom, should pop right up. Check that out, that looks kind of cool. Maybe I will drag some more in here. I don't know, like a cemetery gate is kind of cool. Make this 0. Drag this up. Also drag this onto FG layer so it pops up. Put this stuff in the foreground maybe, so it's almost like, you know, we're looking into, we're looking it through the gates, right? And this is just a little world building here, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on it. But I do want to show you where we're going. If I scrub here, you see I'm starting to do things. I move this tombstone back a little bit. Maybe I'll just save this so hopefully it doesn't crash. Maybe I'll drag one of these other ones in there. Also put this at 0. You know, I can't really place these things behind her right now because she's not rotoscoped out. So what you could do, you could imagine in your head, hey, this one's going to be behind her, and we could render that out separately. Or you could just use them as foreground elements right now. So these are a little hot, so I'm going to go to this light. If I just turn this light off, I'm going to go to the skylight. Change this to cube map instead. My skylight, because this is so flat lighting, I'm going to say specified cube map, and I guess this is the only one that's in here, unfortunately. And just try to take that, whoa, a little too bright, wow. I think that's a little better. It's still weirdly purplish. But you can dial in these colors. Just need to take the time to do it. I want to show you the pipeline more importantly. So the depth of field is not great right now. I need to set that up. So I can change that by going to my camera here. Camera's going to be where your C4D file is, 3D tracker camera. And if you scroll down, you can go into focus settings and also lens settings. You can set the aperture. You can set the minimum and maximum f-stop. I like severe depth of field. That's impossible with real cameras, so I'm going to put this at 0.1 for minimum f-stop. And I'm going to change the current aperture to, I don't know, let's just say 1. And right away, you should see my depth of field updates right here. So in order to focus the camera, there's this manual focus distance and draw debug focus plane. If you click draw debug focus plane, that's going to put this purple outline basically where we're focused at. So if I scroll on manual focus distance, you'll see that we move this plane forward and back in the world, right? So you say I want to focus on her, then I'm behind this one gravestone here because she's behind it. And actually, I'm probably more, if I look at the scene here, it looks like she's in line with the table. So maybe I want to drag this back to the table. You know, everything's kind of in focus in the background anyway, so I really just want the extreme foreground out of focus. Okay. Let's open up this window a little bit. Now I got some depth of field on my gate. It's kind of neat. The camera comes in. Maybe that gravestone is a little out of focus in the foreground. So maybe I either want to move that up or I want to change my aperture to not be so out of focus. So if I look at this, all these assets are kind of just sitting on the ground right now. Some other things that I might want to do to make them look a little bit more believable would be to get some dirt meshes and cover up the bottom. Why does that keep doing that? Get some dirt meshes to cover up the bottom of the objects to better help merge the video dirt with the actual dirt. Also, maybe get some little grass meshes to try to simulate the grass in the video, and try to start merging these two worlds together of the video and the CG. And also work on the lighting a little bit better because it's weirdly pink still. It's not doing anything. Skylight. We can also change the color in post. And take down this intensity. You can also go into your post-processing volume. If you don't have one, you can get one from the Place Actors window. And you can play around with different exposure settings here, like exposure compensation. I'm not really happy with the lighting in this scene, so I'm actually going to blow up all the lights. I just deleted all the default lights and the default post-processing volume. This is the problem starting with a default map instead of just an empty map, is you get all this other crap in here. So I'm going to add a light in. Lights. I'm going to add a directional light. Directional light's kind of like my sun, right? And it's pretty harsh right now, but that's okay. And I'm going to lower down the power on this. You might see the screen how it's like auto adjusting. If I crank this up, eventually, it's 150 intensity right now, but it doesn't look like it's 150 intensity. It seems like it's gradually brightening. And this is auto brightness that happens with something that's called the post-processing volume. So I'm going to reset this back to a default value of 10. And I'm going to go up here and type in post. I'm going to get a post-processing volume and drag that into my world. Now there's some settings that we want to mess around with here. With the post-processing volume selected, I'm going to go down to the bottom, and you want to post-processing volume settings, type in or check the box for infinite extent. That basically means everything in the world is going to be affected by this. And then we also want to go to exposure and check the box for min and max. And the numbers you put in here are going to depend on what you're trying to do. You need to play around with them. But basically, you want these two numbers to be the same. What that means is that there's none of that automatic brightening and darkening that happens. That's called eye adaptation. It's sort of like when you're in a movie theater and you come outside after sitting in the dark, and it takes a little second for your eyes to adjust, but eventually they do. The exposure is not changing, it's just your eyes are adapting. Unreal has that on by default. It's kind of annoying when you're trying to dial in lights and colors. So now that this is kind of locked, I can go back to my lights, and where's my lights at? My directional light here. And now I can play around and actually like try to make this look decent. So that looks better. It's a little dark underneath the table though, so I'm going to get a skylight and drag that into the world. Skylight is like a general fill light. I'm going to change this from source type with it selected and go to cube map. I'm going to do just this one. This is kind of like a general fill light, and just a tiny bit I want to just fill in that shadow underneath. The lighting in this shot is very, very flat. So that's a little bit better. The lighting in the actual scene is not the most exciting, so work with what you have. And like I was saying earlier, I would want to get some meshes of dirt to put around this table to make it look like the table's kind of sunk down into the dirt. Same with the chairs. Maybe get some meshes for grass to make them poke up around these objects. All that sort of stuff. But it's working. And now I want to show you how to render this out. So I'm going to go to a foreground here and drag foreground into my sequencer so it pops up down here. I'm going to click the little clapboard here. And we want this render movie settings window. We're actually using, there's two of them here. If you click this little drop down, we want movie scene capture legacy. So if you get something that looks different, it's probably because you're clicked on this. We want movie scene capture legacy. And I want to set my image output format to composure export. You can choose your resolution and choose where you want to save this out to. I'm just going to save it in test 3. And we would need to just capture movie now. There's one thing I forgot to set though. So I'm going to set my timeline back to 0 here. Oops. I'm going to set my timeline back to 0. And I'm going to go to track, camera cut track, and click the little plus on camera cut track and pick my 3D camera tracker. It's basically telling Unreal, this is the camera that I want to render to. Still have that purple focus thing. I'm just going to turn that off real quick. It's not a big deal if you don't turn it off, but it was annoying me. Okay, so camera cut track. So now I can click on the little clapboard again. Everything was already set up from last time, and click capture movie. Might ask you to save, save. And we'll let that render. So depending on how long your video is, that might take some time to render. After it finishes, I'm going to jump back over into After Effects. And in the project window, I'm going to import the image sequence that we just rendered. This is where mine is located. Remember, these you want to check Open EXR sequence so it comes in as a video sequence rather than still images. EXRs are fantastic compositing files. They're very large, but they process very quickly, even on slow computers. So I'm going to select the first one, click Open, and then I'm going to drag it into my scene. And check that out. It lays right over top. And if I play it, it's a little choppy because After Effects is processing. But in comes the depth of field and everything. Still have my blue solid there in After Effects. I'm just going to turn that off. Pretty cool, right? And you know, this is a layer in After Effects, so I could, you know, do anything to it. You know, put a levels adjustment on it if I wanted to. You know, I can brighten and darken it. I can color it. It's just a layer of video now. So anything that you would normally do to it, you can. You could render these assets out as even more separate pieces if you put them in different CG elements, you know? So maybe you had the extreme foreground ones and then the middle ground ones if you wanted to separate them out for some reason so that you could manipulate them in After Effects. That would be really useful. Yeah, so at this point, you know, we've tracked a camera from live action footage. We tracked it in After Effects. We brought that into C4D to turn it into a 3D camera. We brought that 3D camera over into Unreal using Datasmith. And then we set up composure in Unreal. And then we rendered that back into an EXR sequence that I then brought into After Effects. And now we're all set. That's pretty much the last step here. So if you've gotten this far, you should feel pretty great.